After watching his wife get taken to the labor room, a man named Greg waits for a while, only to be told that she didn't make it. He's devastated to hear this, but he asks about the baby. The doctor tells him that even though the baby survived, he has a rare condition of albinism. Greg looks confused as he hears this, but he says he wants to see the baby. As he is then taken to see his child, Greg looks shocked and tells the doctor that he doesn't think it's his child. Many years later, a local sheriff named Doug leads a woman named Jessie to a house where a man has just died. He tells her that the dead man's grandson is too scared to come out from the basement and that he thinks Jessie is the best person to convince the boy to step out. As they walk into the house, they meet the deputy sheriff, Harley, who looks scared and says he just heard the boy moving around. He also seems to think there's a monster in the basement, but Doug tells Harley to wait outside. Just then, Doug shows Jessie where the boy is hiding, and as they go down together, they can't find anyone. However, it turns out the boy is in the dark, and he tells them his name is Jeremy. Jessie then tells him to show his face, and even though he initially refuses, he eventually comes out of the dark and leaves Doug shocked by how pale he looks. Almost immediately, Jessie tells Doug to help Jeremy get something to eat, and the sheriff heads back up to arrange something for him. Jessie then asks Jeremy why he didn't tell anyone about his grandfather's death, and he says he was scared that people would come in to take him away. She then asks why he prefers to stay in the basement, and he says it's because of the sunlight. He also mentions that his glasses are no longer effective in protecting his eyes and that he may now need contact lenses. As Jessie looks around the room, she sees several books on a shelf and asks him if he goes to school. Jeremy says he has never been to school, but he has read a couple of things about it. Jessie looks confused and then picks up a book and asks if he has read it. He says he has read all the books in the room, and just then, he tells her to pick a page number. After she picks one, it turns out that Jeremy knows everything on each page of all the books in the room, leaving Jessie shocked. Shortly after, Jeremy agrees to follow Jessie out of the house, and as he steps out, she tells him not to be scared of leaving. However, he says he can sense that she's scared for him. Jessie says nothing, and Jeremy then heads for her car, with all the people outside staring at him. As he leaves with her, Harley tells Doug he has a theory about what happened. He says that with all the lightning rods on the roof, it's possible that Jeremy killed his grandfather with lightning. Doug doesn't believe this, especially because it has been found that Jeremy's grandfather died of natural causes. He tells Harley to forget about his theory, and together, they leave the house. Meanwhile, Jessie drives Jeremy to a school where she's the director. As they arrive, Jeremy sees some boys playing football on a field, but Jessie tells him not to be bothered by them. However, as he steps out of the car and heads inside, all the boys are shocked to see how he looks. After Jeremy enters the building and waits outside Jessie's office, he hears her calling someone and telling the person that he's just like a child. As he's listening, he sees some of the school's students still staring at him, but they run away when he looks at them. Shortly after, he heads to the cafeteria to eat. While he's in there, everyone can't take their eyes off him. Not long after, a guy named John leads his friends to sit next to Jeremy. After they sit, John starts asking Jeremy about how he looks and if he's sick, but Jeremy doesn't say anything. John then forcefully tries to get Jeremy's attention, after which he says it's a tradition for all newcomers to wear a spoon on their nose. John tells a boy named Mitch to show how it's done, but after he does it, Jeremy just picks a spoon and rubs his thumb on it. This eventually turns it into a magnet that attracts all the spoons in the cafeteria to form a spoon wall in front of Jeremy. All the students are left shocked by this, and they also watch as one of the spoons strolls to join the others. Elsewhere, Doug heads home and sees his son, Steve, at the house. They don't seem to be on talking terms, so they just go their separate ways without saying a word to each other. Doug then goes into the house to see his sick wife, Emma, who is being cared for by a nurse named Maxine. As Doug sits next to her while she's very weak and unable to say anything, he tells Maxine about Jeremy, but the nurse doesn't seem to like what she hears. The next day, Jessie takes Jeremy to a hospital, and after a series of tests, the doctor says he's in perfect condition. He also mentions that Jeremy will get his contact lenses after a few days. Jessie then says she knows another school Jeremy can attend, and he agrees to change schools because he doesn't have much of a choice. The following day, Jeremy starts a new school and also gets a lot of stares as he walks to his class. Later that day, while in a science class, the teacher, Donald, starts talking about electricity. Meanwhile, Jeremy seems to have caught the eye of a girl named Lindsay, who appears to like him. After a while, Donald brings out a device to show the students how electricity travels. As the device comes on and electricity starts flowing through, Jeremy gets uncomfortable and appears to be controlling the device. Things eventually get serious, and the lightning bolts grow bigger and hit Jeremy. As everyone in the class looks terrified, they watch as the lightning also lifts Jeremy. Before things get worse, Donald breaks the machine and immediately goes to see Jeremy, who is then taken to a hospital. When Doug and Harley arrive at the hospital, they don't seem to believe Donald's explanation of what happened. The doctor also says there's no scratch on Jeremy, and it appears that nothing happened to him. Donald remains intrigued by what he saw, and he tells Doug and the others that what happened to Jeremy takes his understanding of science to a different level. He also says there has to be an explanation for why Jeremy didn't get any bruises. While he's talking, a nurse comes to get the doctor, who is told that Jeremy has escaped. Meanwhile, Jeremy walks around the town and gets attracted to the barks of a dog coming from a nearby house. As he goes closer to the fence, he soon realizes that it's Lindsay's house, and she comes out to meet him. She looks happy to see him and jokes about what happened in class. This makes Jeremy happy, but as they keep talking, he notices that the people around are staring at him from inside their houses. He then asks Lindsay if she has ever thought about what people think as she looks at them. She asks if he can do it, and he says it's one of the things he can do. She then asks if he's okay, and he says there's nothing wrong with him. Shortly after, he leaves her house, but eventually gets caught by Harley and Doug, who tell him that he needs to return to the hospital. Jeremy says he doesn't like hospitals, but Doug insists that he goes there to complete a series of tests. Jeremy then mentions that his worst day on Earth was spent in a hospital, and when Doug asks which day it was, he says it was the day his mother gave birth to him. The next day, after Jeremy returns to Jessie's school, she asks him if he has ever had an IQ test. Even though he says he hasn't done such a test before, he mentions that his grandmother always told him that he was a fast learner. Jessie then takes him into a room where a group of experts from the State Board of Education tell Jeremy that after analyzing the results of the tests he took, they discovered that he's a genius. But Jeremy says he doesn't care about their tests and that all he wants is to go home. He even gets so angry that the lights start to blink and all the wristwatches start malfunctioning. He eventually heads out, and later that night, Doug tells him that Jessie is only trying to help him. Not long after, Jeremy hears the sound of thunder from a distance and looks scared. However, Doug tells him not to be bothered about it because there's no expected rainfall in the area for a while. Jeremy then says that whenever lightning strikes, he always feels like it's coming for him. He adds that his grandmother used to say that the strikes were from God, but he doesn't believe her because the lightning is also what led to his mother's eventual death after it struck her while she was pregnant with him. The next day, while Jeremy is walking in the woods, John and Mitch appear behind him while they're hunting. John immediately tries to bully Jeremy, and he even points his gun at him and threatens to shoot. Mitch tries to stop him, but John refuses to bring down his gun. Just then, a gunshot is heard from elsewhere, and as the three boys check where it came from, they see that Harley has just shot a deer while also hunting in the woods. As he boasts about how good his shot was, Harley sees Jeremy and asks what he's doing there. Instead of saying anything, Jeremy goes forward to touch the dying deer before then holding on to Harley firmly. With this, Harley starts to feel the pain of the deer, but before he gets really traumatized, John gets Jeremy to leave the deputy sheriff alone. Following this, they all stare at Jeremy while looking scared. Doug eventually hears of what happened and scolds Jeremy in front of Jessie. He then has to leave when he gets an emergency call. However, when Jeremy is alone with Jessie, he says he wants to go home. He also adds that he needs her to stop pretending to be his friend if she can't allow him to return home. He even gets really angry that he shatters every piece of glass in the office with his mind, after which he leaves. Elsewhere, Doug gets home only to be told that Emma's condition is not improving. The doctor also tells him that even though Emma is not strong enough, she seems to be holding on. As Doug wonders if she's trying to send him a message, the doctor says he needs to let her go as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Donald meets with Jeremy and talks about how intrigued he still is by what happened the other day in class. He also offers to shake Jeremy so they can be friends. Jeremy hesitates for a while, but after he shakes Donald's hand, he says it's the first time anyone has willingly touched him in a long time. Donald then holds on to Jeremy very well, and this makes him cry. Later that day, Doug goes to see Harley when he hears that his deputy has returned all his hunting guns to the office. Doug asks why he did it, and Harley explains what Jeremy did and how he's still traumatized by the deer's feelings while dying. Just then, Doug realizes that Jeremy might be able to help him with his wife. He immediately meets Jessie to ask about it, and she lets him take Jeremy. When they get to Doug's house, Maxine doesn't seem to like the fact that Jeremy is going to be with Emma, so she says she's going to call Steve. However, Jeremy touches Emma and starts listening to what she has to say. He says that Emma is still holding on because she wants to ensure Doug will be fine after she's gone. She also tells him that she wants him and Steve to reconcile. She then tells Doug to wear her old wedding ring for her, and just then she dies. Steve arrives right on time, but before he can enter the house, he meets Doug at the entrance. As Doug and Steve then head towards each other, the two men share a warm embrace with tears in their eyes. The next day, while at a town event, Jeremy and Lindsay spend time together. Jeremy also touches her so she can see how he's feeling, as well as the things he experienced from his past. At this point, she realizes that Jeremy was staying with his grandparents because his dad disowned him after he was born. She also confesses that she likes him, but not long after, Lindsay's dad shows up and tells Jeremy to stay away from his daughter. He almost hurts Jeremy, but Jesse shows up and defends him. As he then takes his daughter away, Lindsay says sorry to Jeremy for her dad's embarrassing behavior. The next day, Jeremy decides to leave the school, but before he can get out of the building, John shows up to bully him. However, Jeremy sees a vision of a point in John's past where his stepdad used to beat him. He mentions it to John, but he doesn't seem to like it. Out of anger, John takes Jeremy outside and removes his clothes, after which he throws him into a pool of dirty water. As John and his friends then bring him out of the water, they are about to throw him in again when Jeremy suddenly uses his magnet abilities to attract all the metal objects on their bodies. He eventually causes an explosion that gets the boys to leave him. As he then gets up, he realizes that John is unconscious. After several attempts to try to revive him, Mitch and Jeremy are left shocked as they believe John is already dead. However, John wakes up, and as Jeremy looks relieved, Mitch offers to help him find a way to escape. With Mitch's help, Jeremy finally leaves the school and heads back home. Shortly after, Jessie drives fast to find Jeremy at his house. As she enters the basement, Jessie sees that all Jeremy's books have been cleared. She feels sorry for him and tells him that she knows their town is not the right place for him. However, she promises to do whatever it takes to find him a good place where he can live freely without fear. He hugs her afterwards, and Donald also shows up, looking ready to help them get out of town. As they go outside, they see that Doug and Harley have arrived. The two men tell Donald and Jessie to hand Jeremy over because they can't let him leave town. Despite this, Jessie manages to convince Doug to look elsewhere, and he agrees. He then tells Harley to leave the house and return to their office, but the deputy sheriff doesn't seem so happy with this. He still tries to call for backup, but Doug stops him. Just as Jessie looks happy to finally be free to take Jeremy out of town, she hears the sound of thunder in the sky. Suddenly, Jeremy starts running toward the sound, and they all follow him. However, as the lightning strikes, it hits Jeremy and then continues to push him as he runs. After a while, the intensity increases, and it makes Jeremy disappear into thin air. Jessie and the others are initially left shocked and devastated by this, but they realize that it's probably the best thing for Jeremy.